We're all leaving unless you give us 5 times our salary. Oh, was that correct? Those were the words I whispered to myself. I had put up with their foolishness for the previous year, but this degree of ignorance, or rather, their outright rudeness, was much worse than I had anticipated. I never imagined that adults could be that immature. I am aware that some people have children in their minds, but are grown-ups in age. These three are excellent illustrations. Their intellectual prowess, great degrees, and solid connections are the true issue. They fit well nicely with this company. It's not that I don't value education and relationships. They are important resources. We use them if we have them, after all. These three's extreme adherence to their own vision is the main problem. To be honest, it seems completely stupid to waste additional time and effort on them. However, the business will not benefit from ignoring the issue either. Above all, these three are holding back my subordinates. It is my duty as their supervisor to take charge and guide them. They must understand that others don't just follow their wishes and that the world doesn't revolve around them. I suppose I should teach them that since I am, in a sense, their employer. Sincerely, I don't want to handle this. I have no choice but to teach brats like these, even though it's a pain. It was just plain terrible luck that these three were placed in my section a year ago. Carter is my name. I am a 42-year-old manager of Section 2 in the development department of an ordinary corporation. I have been with Dale Industries for 18 years. My early years were everything but easy. My father lost almost all of our savings when he quit his job to launch his own business when I started junior high. It failed, of course. What kind of success would you anticipate from someone who had no background or experience in business? My mother, who had been a homemaker full-time until that point, took on the challenge. With unwavering perseverance, she sought employment and supported our family. Her determination to help us was so strong that I was touched, even as a young child. After observing her example, my father eventually got back up and secured a job at a small business. The financial situation of our family had stabilized by the time I started studying for college entrance examinations. I was able to get into college as a result. I learned some valuable lessons from that event, including to be aware of your own capabilities, to avoid aiming for things that are out of your price range, and to never stop developing and bettering yourself. Some made fun of me by claiming that I lacked ambition, but I've always held the opinion that ambition is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. It's something you display when it really counts, as when my mother began working to provide for us. When these three were assigned to Section 2 in the development department 2 years ago, the entire ordeal started. Section 2 is often understaffed, so having 3 new hires made us very happy. We thought they would be prepared to help after they had finished their training. How mistaken we were. From day one, everyone was shocked to learn that the 3 of them were troublemakers. They presented themselves to me with startling haughtiness on their first day. We were top talent because we graduated from Stanford University. You'd better be careful, or we'll quickly overtake you. Caden, who seemed to be the ringleader, delivered this line so confidently that I was momentarily speechless. When people say something so far beyond the scope of normal behavior, it's hard to react. Caden must have mistaken my silence for intimidation because he smiled brightly and added, "Don't worry, we'll go easy on you." I mean, Carter, you're probably just some local college graduate, right? It's amazing you even made it to manager. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Did this kid even realize what he was saying? Do they not even understand that this isn't something you say to your manager? I probably looked completely dumbfounded, but they didn't seem to notice. The 3 of them walked away with a spring in their step, as if to say, "We really showed him with that opening strike." On their backs, I could almost see the words. "We're so cool for speaking our minds to the boss on day 1. But what I saw instead was idiots. The one I truly felt sorry for was my subordinate of 3 years, whom I had assigned as their mentor. I went back and reread their resumes. Graduated from Stanford University with honors? Huh. Most graduates from prestigious universities go on to accomplish impressive things in their careers, but among them, there are always a few entitled fools who think too highly of themselves. Sure, they have pride in their education, but does that mean they can perform at the level of that pride? That's a whole other story. On top of that, it didn't look like any of them had ever applied themselves to anything meaningful. They're perfect examples of privileged, sheltered kids, and here they are, flaunting that privilege. I couldn't help but wonder what HR was thinking when they hired these three. After I asked my fellow colleague in HR, it didn't take long to find out. Caden was the nephew of Max, the senior vice president. So it was nepotism. Caden got in, and his entourage followed suit. I let out a sigh. A new hire's role is the same at any company. They are placed in entry-level positions and gradually learn the job. So it takes some time for them to be able to work on their own. But Caden didn't seem to understand this. "Excuse me, how long do you intend to keep us on these pointless tasks? Do you even know what the right person for the right job means? Isn't this a waste of our talent?" A week after his assignment, he came up to my desk and puffed his chest out. Behind him, of course, were his two cronies. Why not give these menial tasks to people from lower-ranked colleges or those who haven't achieved anything significant? Surely Stanford graduates like us shouldn't be doing work like that. In a reasonably clear voice, he said it without an ounce of shame, so everyone in the development department heard the words. Half of the room is beyond aghast and decides to pretend they don't hear it. The rest of the room doesn't even try to hide their anger. They are glaring at the backs of the three of them with horrified eyes. If those eyes had been lasers, there would have been countless holes in the backs of the three of them long ago. However, the three of them, who overestimated themselves, could not possibly perceive such an atmosphere, and they were unperturbed. How insensitive. It should not be my role to educate these people on common sense. That said, as they're my subordinates, I have a certain level of responsibility. I resent being told by people in other departments that I don't know how to educate my subordinates. What kind of work do you want to do? Do you have any good ideas? Caden's face lit up as if he'd been waiting for this question. According to them, having graduated from Stanford University with high honors, it would be a waste for them to work just to be used by someone else. It's obvious that the role of leading the team is the right one for us. Project leader is the right job for us. At this, I nearly sighed out loud. What I had asked was clear. I meant what specific part of development work they wanted to take on. I asked if they had any concrete ideas worth discussing, and yet all he said was that he wanted to be the leader. He had no clear vision, no actionable plan, and just an empty desire for a title. This makes them full-blown useless. What can I do with people who don't even have a clear vision for their work, especially here in the development section? This department is meant to be a pioneer, breaking into new fields. What kinds of products will succeed in the future? What's needed? Where's the demand? We share ideas based on these questions and move forward toward product development. It is such a department, and yet these three, who haven't even mastered the basics, are demanding to be project leaders. Carter, don't disappoint us, okay? I was already beyond disappointed. God, someone please take my place as manager. My other subordinates must have sensed my frustration. They shot me pitying looks before pointedly turning away, as if to say, "Nope, don't look at us. This one's all you." I had drawn the short straw. No doubt about it. I decided to think of these three as children, like they are preschoolers, to be precise. Small children live in a world that revolves around themselves. They don't see the people or things around them. They are unable to read the current situation, and when things don't go their way, they throw tantrums. That's what these guys were. Okay, they didn't literally cry and scream, but they might as well have. Every single day, they loudly complain with things like, "It's unbearable to work under an ignorant manager who doesn't recognize our value." I can't believe everyone here just puts up with it. Oh, that's right. If you're worthless, You can't say anything, can you? They even spoke rudely to veteran employees and seemed to treat female coworkers like mothers or housekeepers. Naturally, no one could stand them anymore, and they were shunned by the entire office. But these three didn't notice a thing. I never imagined they could be so oblivious, so self-centered. If this went on any longer, it would seriously affect team morale. They kept pestering me about real work, so I appointed Caden as project chief for a minor assignment. Of course, he was just a figurehead. I discreetly asked a capable senior female colleague to handle things behind the scenes. Sorry to ask, but you're the best person for this. I'll make it up to you later. She gave me a look of sympathy and said, if I can help you even a little, I'll do my best. Thanks to her and the rest of the team, the project was completed successfully. Caden and his entourage proudly claimed the credit, of course, but no one took them seriously. Everyone knew the truth. They'd been humored and kept out of the way. The female collie and team members were already in on the plan. The only ones unaware were the Three Stooges themselves. After the project ended, I checked with a senior colleague about another small task I'd entrusted to her. So, how did that matter go? Oh, they said something absolutely fatal. Even I didn't expect them to go that far. She smiled and added, I sent the file to you, by the way. I thanked her again. Time passed, the fiscal year ended, and the salary review meetings wrapped up. Many of my subordinates received significant raises, except for Caden and his two sidekicks. This is ridiculous, Carter. You mean to tell me we're not getting raises after we made that project a success? This is negligence on your part. There's no way those other useless team members could have done it without us. I didn't say anything, just sighed, and Caden stuck his tongue out and turned himself around. Then the next morning, Caden and two of his cronies came up to my desk with their resignation letters and said, this is our final ultimatum. If you don't increase our salaries fivefold, we're all quitting. Losing us, such talented individuals, would be an immeasurable loss for the company. You'll probably lose your job, too, just so you know. My uncle is Max, the senior vice president. Are you really willing to go against the executives? I guess they thought I was freaked out when I stared at them in dismay, wondering what that was all about. Caden continued his assertion in a pompous manner. My college friends at other companies couldn't believe it when I shared project details. They all said, why haven't you been promoted yet? The entire department froze, and so did I. Did he just say he shared project details with people from other companies? Surely, he knows about confidentiality agreements. I could only imagine the shock of the people he spoke to. Who in their right mind would blurt out what is essentially corporate secrets to outsiders? This kid is beyond help. I had tried to manage this situation, but this was the last straw. Behavior like this could jeopardize the company itself. I didn't want to do it, but there was no other choice. I stared at the three of them and picked up the resignation letters from my desk. Ignoring them, I opened the internal email app, sent a quick message, and then stood up, leaving the development room. I walked straight to the president's office. After greeting his secretary, I was led inside. The president, Mr. Kessler, welcomed me with a smile but quickly asked, "What's this all about?" I explained the situation briefly, and predictably, Mr. Kessler's face contorted like he'd bitten into something sour. He muttered, "Well, we'll have to accept all 3 resignations then, of course. But I think leaving them unsupervised for now could be dangerous." Mr. Kessler thought for a moment, and then nodded. "You're right," he said, and instructed his secretary to summon Caden and his entourage. Mr. Kessler suggested I sit on the couch, but I dared to stand and wait for them. Before long, Caden and his 2 cronies strutted in, puffing their chests like peacocks. "We heard you wanted to see us, sir, so we came right away," they said, their faces practically screaming. "The president finally recognized our success. Take that." But Mr. Kessler's face remained stony, and he said nothing. They must have thought, when they saw Mr. Kessler just standing there, watching them. The eyes of the three of them wandered around, like children expecting praise, only to realize they'd been called in to be scolded. Then Caden's wandering gaze found me, and his expression twisted again. "Carter, what are you doing in the president's office? Don't you think you're out of place?" "Oh, I get it. You're trying to cover up your own failures by badmouthing us to Mr. Kessler, aren't you?" I suppressed a sigh. Mr. Kessler, however, didn't bother to hide his exasperation. He let out a heavy sigh and finally spoke. "Caden, do you even realize what you've done?" The three of them looked confused. Caden spoke up. "Mr. Kessler, whatever he told you, it's just jealousy. This man is only good at cozying up to management. And for the record, I was hired because of Max's recommendation. He's my uncle, you know, a proud Stanford graduate like me. I was always destined to join this company." Caden's smug face made Mr. Kessler's expression darken even further. "So you're saying that I, the company president, am a fool who's been manipulated by someone cozying up to me?" Caden finally realized he had stepped in it. He stammered, trying to explain himself, but I hesitated and decided it was time to step in. "You've repeatedly done and said things that cross every line. The biggest issue here is that you can't even distinguish between what's acceptable and unacceptable. And worse, you're not even aware of it." "What the hell? A manager from some third-rate college dares to lecture me?" Caden scoffed. At this, Mr. Kessler said quietly, "Carter graduated from Harvard University's graduate school." The looks on their faces were priceless. Utter disbelief, like children caught misbehaving. It was almost sad. Yes, I had gone to Harvard University for graduate studies. My professor had practically begged me to stay on for research, and my parents had encouraged it, so I went. But after graduating, I didn't stay in academia. I turned down my professor's offer and joined this company instead. An economist's life isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's not exactly a field you can rely on to put food on the table. In the real world, academic credentials don't matter nearly as much as your attitude toward work. That's what counts, as a professional and as a human being. Seeing Caden and his friends clinging so desperately to their degrees, I almost felt sorry for them. At that moment, the door to the president's office burst open, and in stormed a stout, well-built man who looked to be in his 60s. It was Max. To me, he was someone far above the clouds, a figure I'd never directly interacted with because we worked in completely separate spheres. I knew his face, of course, but I never imagined he'd have a nephew like Caden. If anything, I heard Max was the cautious, meticulous type who always thought things through. The moment he entered, he barked at his nephew. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you trying to disgrace me?" When Mr. Kessler informed me of this, I was so shocked I nearly fell out of my chair. Caden shook his head in denial and tried to play it cool. "Max, please relax. This is all a trap. Mr. Kessler and you are both being deceived by him." He jabbed his finger toward me and shouted, "This guy is sabotaging us because he can't handle his own responsibilities. He's a disgrace, someone so incompetent. He has to drag down talented elites like us." Max hesitated for a moment. I couldn't blame him. It's natural to want to believe his nephew. I had also heard that Max had a strong bias toward family. I glanced over at Mr. Kessler, and he let out yet another deep sigh before speaking. "Max, I understand that you want to believe in your nephew, but I too want to believe in my son-in-law." The room went silent. I simply shrugged. Yes, Mr. Kessler was my father-in-law. His daughter had worked here as a regular employee 18 years ago under an assumed name, for the sake of learning about society. I joined the company at the same time as her, and we met at a social event for unmarried employees and hit it off. When I proposed to her, I had no idea she was the president's daughter. Only then did I find out who she really was. When I did, I told her, "I want to marry you, not the president's daughter." Her face lit up as she replied, That's exactly why I fell in love with you. Everyone else only saw the company and its power behind me. No one ever saw me. Mr. Kessler had said that if I was a man who could see his daughter for who she was, then he could trust me to take care of her within the company. I'd always been just another employee. I earned my role as a manager through my own abilities, nothing more. Still, having my connection to Mr. Kessler revealed at a moment like this left me with mixed feelings. It felt like I was tricking everyone into thinking I had more influence than I actually did. Honestly, I hate that kind of thing. But using my connection might be the simplest way to resolve this mess. Caden, however, wasn't done. That's it. Carter is a spy for Mr. Kessler. He's trying to frame us. And yes, I see it now. He's planning to take my uncle's place as senior vice president. Max turned to look at Mr. Kessler, then at me. His gaze was trembling with uncertainty. I understood how he felt. People cling to their position because it's human nature. When forced to choose between ideals and reality, reality often wins. It's a tool for survival. But this misunderstanding couldn't be allowed to fester. If this continues, Mr. Kessler may be under strange suspicion. I don't want people to misunderstand that we are trying to trick Max and make me his daughter-in-law and executive. I had no choice but to counter trickery with trickery. I reached for my phone and pressed a button. A voice echoed through the room. Tasks like this should be left to people from lower-ranked schools or those who haven't achieved anything significant. Stanford graduates like us shouldn't have to do menial work, should we? Then tell me, what kind of work do you want to do? It's obvious, isn't it? Leading the team. Being a project leader is the job that suits us best. This is our final ultimatum. Unless you increase our salaries fivefold, we're all quitting. Losing talented people like us would be an immeasurable loss for the company. You'll probably lose your job too, just so you know. My uncle is the senior vice president here. Are you really willing to go against an executive? Moments like this are when the recording feature on a phone becomes truly invaluable. I queued up another audio file I'd been given by the email colleague I had quietly placed as the real leader of their project. It was a recording from one of their project meetings. What are you all whining about? Consumers are idiots anyway. We just need to manipulate them into buying what we want. If we're making cheap private label products, then just use cheap materials. Why bother seriously calculating production costs? That's a waste of time. If you buy cheap materials in bulk, you'll get a better deal. And if there's any excess, just throw it away. Be more efficient. Honestly, you people are useless. The recording played out in the dead silence of the president's office. Mr. Kessler's eyes sharpened dangerously. His business philosophy is to provide high-quality and affordable private label products for consumers without focusing solely on profits. He constantly reminds his employees of this in his instructions. Business isn't about just making a profit. Our customers must thrive as well. That's how true success works. No doubt, this especially angered Mr. Kessler. Max, standing off to the side, seemed to shrink further into himself. He was one of the senior executives who had helped Mr. Kessler build this company from the ground up, so he knew that philosophy better than anyone. Watching him bow his head and shake it slowly was almost painful. However, Caden did not even look around and try to make a last stand. Recording us like that, that's sneaky and underhanded. Max finally looked up, glaring at Caden. His face was bright red. He was so angry and embarrassed that he was at a loss for words. Even Caden seemed to realize he pushed too far and clamped his mouth shut. I really need to check Max's blood pressure later, I thought absent-mindedly. After a moment, Max seemed to compose himself. He turned to me, grabbed me firmly by the shoulders, and spoke with deep regret. I'm so sorry. This is entirely my fault. I let my nephew run wild, and I take full responsibility. It's not something you should blame yourself for, I assured him. Mr. Kessler had chosen Max as an executive for a reason. He was fundamentally a good man. He had simply let his affection for his family cloud his judgment. But he had the humility to admit his mistakes and take responsibility, something that spoke volumes about his character. Max put another gulp into his hand that gripped my shoulder before turning to Caden and the others. As expected, Caden and the others seemed to realize that there was no escape now. Without a word, they turned their eyes to Max as if they were hanging on to him. They just didn't seem to understand what was wrong with them yet. I guess Max understood that as well. He spoke out of anger that had nowhere to go. "You're all fired." Mr. Kessler plugged his ears with his fingers at Max's roar, and I once again found myself worrying about his blood pressure. Caden and his cronies stood frozen, still wearing clueless expressions as though they hadn't yet understood what had just happened. Max's anger was justified. Firing them too seemed like the natural course of action, but the situation was a little more complicated than that. "Max, I understand how you feel, but outright firing them might not be the best solution." Max stared at me in surprise. "Why not? Think about it. If the new hires brought in under your recommendation are publicly fired instead of resigning voluntarily, it'll start unnecessary rumors. On top of that, if they're cast out now, their resumes will still carry this company's name. That could ultimately hurt the company's reputation." Max looked at me, then shifted his gaze toward Mr. Kessler. Mr. Kessler nodded in agreement as if to say, "He's absolutely right." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Max asked me. "They're spoiled, overconfident brats who've only ever lived in their heads. How about restarting them from the ground up in the field?" Mr. Kessler let out a small chuckle, while Max nodded thoughtfully. Caden and his two sidekicks still stood there, dumbfounded, unable to keep up with the conversation. I advocated getting them out in the field and training them. I sent 3 of them to a major supermarket operated by this company. I asked the site manager to let them do all kinds of work, from carrying loads to taking out products to cleaning. The only condition is that they are not allowed to interact with customers. The manager, someone who had worked his way up from the ground, pounded his chest and said, "Leave it to me." Max took it further and informed Caden's family, as well as the families of the other 2. He requested that no financial or personal aid be provided until the 3 of them shaped up. Caden's parents were shocked. They couldn't believe their son had acted so disgracefully. They pleaded with Max to help mold him into a proper adult. The same request came from the other 2 families. My brother and his wife are sensible people, but it seems they spoiled their son far too much. They overdid it. No wonder Caden turned out the way he did. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together, and the other 2 simply followed his lead. Currently, the 3 of them are working in the back rooms of the supermarket, doing physical labor like moving stock and lifting crates. The very people they once looked down on as ordinary folks are now yelling at them to do real work. If they can't contribute in any other way, they've also been kicked out of their homes, and all their credit cards have been suspended. Out of sheer pity, Max found them a shared apartment where they now split the rent and living expenses. Their incomes are barely above minimum wage, so they're scraping by. I can only hope this hardship teaches them a valuable lesson and turns them into functional members of society. As for me, life has returned to its usual rhythm. I go to work, complete my tasks without fuss, and head home. My wife, who works shorter hours, comes home first and greets me with the kids. The one change is that I no longer work overtime because my wife is not feeling very well and needs me to prepare meals and do the housework. Our 3rd child is due next year. We need to make some more adjustments in the allocation of household responsibilities. Still, Mr. Kessler hasn't stopped his attempts to rope me into taking over the company. "You truly are the man I believed you to be. Isn't it time you accepted that you're meant to succeed me? But I'm just an ordinary manager, an average guy with a wife I love and soon to be 3 kids. That's more than enough for me. It's all I can handle. I'm not interested in carrying more than I can hold." I'm sorry to Mr. Kessler for giving me too much credit. but I'm going to stick to this one. I can organize one section, but the general manager of the company is too much for me. I still haven't forgotten what I swore at the beginning of my life. I will not do a job that is too big for me. That's exactly why I love you so much, my wife tells me. And honestly, that's all I need. For the sake of my family and our future, I'll keep my feet firmly planted on the ground and move forward, one steady step at a time.